Welcome back to Gospel Kanji. I'm your host, Kent Cisco. There is a single word in the Japanese language that captures the heart of what happened that day in Bethlehem during that first journey when the Magi entered the house and saw the Christ child and his mother. It's a word the wise men themselves gave new meaning to when they began creating the Gospel Kanji after their second visit to Jerusalem, having experienced Pentecost and coming to a full understanding of the Gospel. The word is bao, bei. In Japan today, it's used in every greeting, every act of respect. But in its earliest form, bao, this kanji, wasn't just about manners. It meant reverence, an offering before the divine, an act of recognition at the altar. For the wise men, it carried a deeper story still, a memory, a revelation, a moment when God himself was shown to them. When they first came to Bethlehem, they didn't yet understand who the child was. They had seen the star, they had heard the news, even the prophecies, but what awaited them in that small house was far greater than they imagined. They saw a woman and her child. They saw love itself made visible. And then they bowed. Matthew says simply, after coming into the house, they saw the child with Mary his mother, and they fell down and worshiped him. Matthew 2:11. They didn't plan it. Their bodies responded to what their minds were suddenly beginning to understand. In that instant, God showed them the second Adam. 3 decades later, during their second journey to Jerusalem after hearing the apostles teach at Pentecost, they would finally understand what had happened in that moment. They heard the teaching of the apostles, what Paul would later write so plainly. The first man is from the earth, earthly. The second man is from heaven. 1 Corinthians 15:47. And suddenly everything made sense. The first man, Adam, brought sin into the world, and it was this tragedy they had long sought a remedy for. But God himself had a plan. The second man, Jesus, would bring redemption. That day in Bethlehem, they hadn't simply seen a baby, they had seen the second man from heaven, the one God sent to make right what the first had broken. The first Adam, the man of dust, was given every good thing, a garden, the presence of God, the freedom of perfect fellowship with God. But when he chose to eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, he turned his face from his Maker. With that choice came sin, the hunger to be satisfied by the things of earth, the emptiness that follows every self-made attempt to fill the soul, pain, shame, suffering, death. The first man reached for knowledge apart from God and found only loss. But the second Adam, the Christ they met in Bethlehem, came from heaven, and he came to restore what was lost, to forgive what was broken, to bring peace to weary souls and the hope of eternal life. Where the first man's hand, holding the fruit from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, brought separation between God and man, the second man's outstretched hands on the cross brought reconciliation. And so the wise men looked back on that day with new eyes. They remembered how, in that small house, God had shown them his Son, how over time he had revealed the second man, the Redeemer. And at the very sight of the child, their bodies had answered before they could even form the words. They had fallen to the ground and bowed. Decades later, when they returned to Jerusalem and heard the message proclaimed at Pentecost, their hearts burned within them. They finally understood what they had witnessed long ago in Bethlehem. And back in their homeland, during their final years, they began recording the gospel through their written characters, what we now recognize as the gospel kanji. They wanted to preserve that revelation. They wanted their children and their children's children to remember the moment when God had revealed the second Adam, how men from the ends of the earth had bowed before him. In their homeland, writing was already taking shape through symbols that blended meaning and memory. When these men, these wise men, now followers of Christ, returned home, they began shaping new characters to preserve what God had revealed. Each stroke carried purpose. They weren't inventing an entire language, but embedding truth within the existing script, so future generations would recognize the story behind their faith. So with brush and ink, they joined two ideas together, what God had shown them and what they had done in response. They borrowed the kanji for to show and to reveal, often drawn as an altar, a place of divine presence, and they joined that with the kanji for the second one, a mark of sequence, of order. Together, these two characters formed a new kanji, rei, to bow, a picture saying, God is revealing the second Adam. It preserved their revelation that God had shown them the second man. Hidden in the ordinary word for bow is a record of the moment when God showed them the second Adam, the one who takes away the sin of the world. The kanji for bow is a picture of humanity, shown the one who would make all things new. For the wise men, this kanji for bow was worship. It was the physical expression of that revelation. This kanji for bow is still used in the word for Christian worship in Japan today, reihai, a reminder that we bow before the revealed second Adam. This was how they told their story without spoken words. A single written character carried their testimony across generations, pointing us back to the beginning of the greatest story ever told. Their witness was inked into the very language of their people. Yet the bow was only half the story. What moved them to bow was the love they saw first, the tender bond between mother and child, heaven and earth joined in one frame. Before they fell, they had seen love itself, a woman and her child, the tenderness of heaven cradled in human arms. To remember that sight, they formed another word, love, a woman and a child together. Not an idea, but an image of what they saw. The love of God sending his only begotten Son, the love they beheld and the worship it awakened. Whenever they wrote these characters, they remembered the moment that changed them forever, when love drew them to their knees before the second Adam, the one from heaven, who came to save them from their sins. Centuries have passed, yet the kanji for bow still speaks. It reminds us that God has shown us his Son, the second Adam. Every time a believer kneels to pray, every time worship fills a sanctuary, the wise men's act became more than history. It became a living invitation. Every time we bow our heads in prayer, we echo their discovery that true wisdom begins when we kneel before the one God has shown. What began as a motion of awe has become a message of salvation, because the story hidden inside the kanji for bow is the story for every one of us. The first man who fell, Adam, and the second, Jesus, who lifts us up again when we bow, acknowledging what he did for us on the cross. So when we see the kanji for bow, we are reminded what it says. God has shown us the second Adam from heaven, the one who forgives, who heals, who restores. And when you hear the word for worship, reihai, remember that it was born from a moment of revelation, the sight of the child with his mother, the revelation that this was God's Son sent from heaven, and the response that followed, love revealed. The second shone, worship awakened, and we bowed. I hope you enjoyed this story. In the next episode, we will uncover another amazing picture in kanji, one that reveals a foundational Christian truth you will not want to miss. This is Gospel Kanji. See you next time.